When I traveled through America in the 1830s, I encountered a paradox that haunts me still. The very equality that makes democracy so appealing may contain the seeds of its own destruction. Most observers celebrate democracy's triumph over aristocracy, but I discovered something far more unsettling, that democratic peoples, in their passionate pursuit of equality, may willingly surrender their freedom to a new form of despotism unlike anything the world has ever seen. This is not the brutal tyranny of kings or the violent oppression of revolutionaries. It is something subtler, more insidious, and perhaps more dangerous, a soft despotism that emerges from democracy's own deepest impulses. The majority of men today believe that as societies become more equal, they become more free. I fear they are gravely mistaken. Let me reveal why democracy, in its very success, creates conditions that can lead not to greater liberty, but to a gentle yet comprehensive form of servitude. Chapter 1: The Democratic Revolution Creates New Dangers. The democratic revolution I witnessed in America represents the most profound transformation in human society since the fall of Rome. Yet as I observed this great experiment unfold, I realized that most Americans, and indeed most modern peoples, fundamentally misunderstand what democracy truly brings. They see only its benefits, the end of hereditary privilege, the promise of equal opportunity, the dignity accorded to every citizen. But they fail to grasp that democracy creates entirely new dangers precisely because it transforms the very nature of social relationships. In aristocratic societies, men understand their place in a hierarchy stretching from the lowliest peasant to the highest noble. This inequality is visible, accepted, even sanctified by tradition and religion. Each man knows his station and generally accepts it because he sees it as part of the natural order. Despotism in such societies requires force. The king must compel obedience through armies, dungeons, and executioners. The oppression is obvious, and men either submit from fear or resist from indignation. But democratic equality changes everything. When all men consider themselves essentially similar, when every citizen believes himself as worthy as any other, the old sources of authority crumble. Traditional hierarchies lose their legitimacy. Religious distinctions fade. Hereditary distinctions vanish. What remains is a vast multitude of similar individuals, each pursuing his private interests, each convinced of his own importance, yet each feeling isolated and powerless in the face of the majority. This transformation creates what I call individualism, not the healthy independence of free men, but the withdrawal of each person into the narrow circle of family and friends. Democratic man becomes so focused on his private concerns that he gradually loses interest in public affairs. He believes that since he is equal to all others, he needs no one's guidance or assistance. Yet this very isolation makes him vulnerable to a new kind of control. The democratic state, unlike the aristocratic monarch, does not rule through force but through what appears to be consent. It provides for citizens' needs, anticipates their desires, manages their affairs. Citizens mistake this management for care, this oversight for protection. They fail to recognize that in accepting such comprehensive administration of their lives, they are trading their freedom for security, their independence for comfort. The genius of democratic despotism lies in its benevolent appearance. It does not break men's wills but rather makes willing unnecessary. It does not destroy initiative but makes it seem pointless. It does not deny freedom but makes freedom seem burdensome. This is why democracy's slide toward despotism can occur without revolution, without violence, even without visible oppression. Chapter 2: How Equality Paradoxically Enables Control. The passion for equality that drives democratic revolution carries within itself the seeds of its own contradiction. I observed in America how this passion, initially liberating, gradually becomes the instrument of a new kind of subjugation. The mechanism is subtle but inexorable. equality convinces men they need no superiors while simultaneously making them dependent on the collective will. In aristocratic times, inequality was so apparent that no one questioned its existence. The nobleman knew he was superior to the commoner knew he was inferior to the nobleman. These distinctions, however unjust they may seem to modern eyes, created clear lines of authority and responsibility. Men understood who commanded and who obeyed. But democratic equality eliminates these clear distinctions while creating the illusion that no one needs to command or obey. Yet human societies cannot function without authority and coordination. When traditional sources of authority disappear, new ones must emerge. In democratic societies, this authority takes the form of public opinion and majority will. The majority becomes the new sovereign, wielding power more absolute than any king because its authority appears to flow from the people themselves. This creates a profound psychological shift. In aristocratic societies, men submit to authority while understanding it comes from outside themselves. They may resent it, resist it, or rebel against it, but they recognize it as external constraint. In democratic societies, men submit to majority opinion while believing they participate in creating it. This participation, however, is largely illusory. Most citizens have neither the time nor the knowledge necessary to form independent judgments on complex public questions. The result is what I call the tyranny of the majority, not merely political tyranny, but intellectual and moral tyranny. Public opinion becomes an irresistible force that shapes not only behavior but thought itself. Men conform not because they are forced to, but because they cannot imagine thinking differently from their peers. The majority will appears to be their own will multiplied across society. This psychological conformity prepares the ground for political despotism. When men lose the habit of thinking independently, when they automatically defer to majority opinion, when they prefer security to liberty and comfort to responsibility, they become ripe for subjugation by any power that can plausibly claim to represent the general will. The democratic state then presents itself as the embodiment of the people's wishes, the guardian of their interests, the administrator of their affairs. Citizens welcome this guardianship because it relieves them of the burden of self-governance while allowing them to maintain the fiction that they remain free. After all, how can a people oppress itself? How can there be tyranny when the government claims to do only what the people want? Chapter 3: The Erosion of Intermediate Powers. In my travels through America, I discovered that democracy's greatest protection against despotism lies not in constitutional provisions or electoral processes, but in what I call intermediate powers, the countless associations, local institutions, and voluntary organizations that stand between the individual citizen and the central government. Yet I also observed how democratic equality tends to weaken these very institutions that are most essential to preserving freedom. Think for a moment about your own civic engagement. How many voluntary associations do you actively participate in? How often do you attend local government meetings? How well do you know your neighbors? And how frequently do you work together on common projects? These questions reveal the health of what I consider democracy's vital organs, the intermediate bodies that teach citizens the art of self-governance while providing alternative centers of loyalty and authority. In aristocratic societies, intermediate powers exist naturally. Nobles maintain local courts, guilds regulate trades, the church provides education and charity, extended families govern their members' conduct. These institutions may be unjust, but they are numerous, independent, and jealous of their prerogatives. They limit the central power's reach while teaching men to exercise authority and accept responsibility within their own spheres. Democratic equality undermines these traditional intermediate powers. Legal equality destroys hereditary privileges. Economic mobility weakens guild structures. Religious freedom reduces church authority. Geographic mobility breaks up extended families. These changes bring genuine benefits, they free individuals from oppressive traditional constraints and open new opportunities for advancement. But they also create a dangerous vacuum. When intermediate powers weaken, nothing stands between the isolated individual and the omnipresent state. The central government steps in to fill the roles once played by local institutions. It provides education, regulates commerce, manages charity, even attempts to strengthen family life through social programs. Citizens welcome these services because they address real needs that the old intermediate powers once met. Yet this substitution transforms the relationship between citizen and state. Instead of learning self-governance through participation in multiple overlapping institutions, citizens become clients of a single, all-encompassing administrative apparatus. Instead of developing the habits of association and cooperation, they develop habits of dependence and passivity. Instead of experiencing the conflicts and compromises necessary for democratic life, they experience only the smooth functioning of bureaucratic machinery. The erosion proceeds gradually. Local governments lose authority to state governments lose authority to the federal government, elected officials lose authority to administrative agencies, civic associations lose members to private pursuits. Each step seems reasonable, even necessary. Centralization appears more efficient than local control. Professional administration seems more competent than citizen participation. Uniformity appears fairer than local variation. But the cumulative effect is to create what I call administrative despotism, rule by bureaucratic expertise rather than democratic deliberation. Citizens retain the right to vote, but their choices become increasingly meaningless as power shifts from elected representatives to unelected administrators, from local communities to distant capitals, from voluntary associations to governmental agencies. Chapter 4: The Comfortable Chains of Administrative Despotism. The despotism I fear democracy may produce differs fundamentally from any tyranny the world has previously known. It will not resemble the violent oppression of ancient despots or the arbitrary rule of absolute monarchs. Instead, it will be a gentle, comprehensive, and seemingly benevolent power that manages every aspect of citizens' lives while leaving them the illusion of freedom. This new form of despotism will be all the more dangerous because it will be comfortable, convenient, and widely desired by the very people it enslaves. Imagine a paternal government that takes upon itself the responsibility for securing citizens' happiness and watching over their fate. It provides for their security, anticipates their needs, supplies their pleasures, manages their principal concerns, directs their industry, regulates their testaments, and divides their inheritances. Why should it not entirely relieve them from the trouble of thinking and all the cares of living? This government does not break citizens' wills, it softens, bends, and guides them. It rarely forces action but constantly restrains it. It does not destroy but prevents creation. It does not tyrannize but compresses, enervates, extinguishes, and stupefies people until they are reduced to a flock of timid and industrious animals with the government as their shepherd. I have observed how this process begins. Democratic peoples, passionate for equality and comfort, gradually transfer more responsibilities to their government. They demand that it protect them from economic uncertainty, provide for their retirement, educate their children, care for their health, and ensure their safety. Each demand seems reasonable, each service provides genuine benefit, each program addresses real human needs. But the cumulative effect transforms both government and citizens. Government evolves from a limited institution focused on preserving order and protecting rights into a vast administrative apparatus that touches every aspect of human life. Citizens evolve from independent actors responsible for their own welfare into clients dependent on governmental services for their basic needs. The transition occurs so gradually that most people do not notice it happening. They see only that their lives become more secure, more comfortable, more predictable. They appreciate having experts manage complex problems they feel incapable of handling themselves. They value the equality that comes from universal access to governmental services. They enjoy the freedom from personal responsibility that comprehensive administration provides. What they fail to recognize is that they are trading their capacity for self-governance for the security of being governed. They exchange the sometimes difficult freedom of making their own choices for the comfort of having choices made for them. They substitute the safety of dependence for the risks of independence. This trade seems attractive because administrative despotism operates through consent rather than coercion. Citizens retain the right to vote, speak, and associate. They can change their rulers through elections. They can criticize governmental policies. But these formal freedoms become increasingly meaningless as the scope of governmental authority expands and the habits of self-reliance atrophy. The result is a people who remain free in law but servile in fact, who preserve the forms of democracy while losing its substance, who maintain the vocabulary of liberty while accepting the reality of dependence. Chapter 5: Religion's Crucial Role in Restraining Democratic Excess. During my journey through America, I made a discovery that surprised me as a child of the Enlightenment. Religion serves as democracy's essential safeguard against its own tendencies toward despotism. Not because religion supports any particular political system, but because it provides the moral foundation that democracy requires but cannot supply for itself. Without this foundation, democratic equality becomes the path to servitude rather than freedom. Consider how democracy transforms human relationships with moral authority. In aristocratic societies, moral guidance comes from established institutions, church, tradition, hereditary wisdom. Men may question these authorities, but they understand the need for some source of moral truth beyond individual preference. Democracy sweeps away these traditional authorities in the name of equality and individual autonomy, but it cannot eliminate the human need for moral guidance. When external moral authorities disappear, what fills the vacuum? In democratic societies, public opinion becomes the primary source of moral judgment. The majority determines not only what is legal but what is right, not only what is expedient but what is true. This represents a fundamental corruption of moral reasoning. Truth becomes whatever the majority believes, justice becomes whatever the majority desires. This substitution of majority opinion for moral truth prepares the ground for despotism. If the majority can determine right and wrong, if popular will can override individual conscience, if democratic procedures can legitimize any action, then no principle exists to restrain governmental power or protect individual rights. Democracy becomes mere majoritarianism, the rule of the stronger justified by the fiction of consent. Religion counters this tendency by asserting truths that exist independently of human opinion. It proclaims standards of right and wrong that no majority can legitimately change. It insists on the dignity of individual conscience against social pressure. It maintains that some things are sacred regardless of their popularity. In doing so, religion provides what democracy desperately needs but cannot create: fixed points of moral reference. I observed this dynamic clearly in America, where religious faith coexisted comfortably with democratic institutions. Americans understood their political equality as consistent with their spiritual equality before God. They accepted majority rule in temporal affairs while maintaining that certain truths remained beyond majority control. They participated enthusiastically in democratic governance while acknowledging moral authorities higher than popular will. This religious framework did not make Americans less democratic, it made them more capable of sustaining democracy. By limiting the claims of popular sovereignty, religion prevented democracy from becoming totalitarian. By insisting on the primacy of conscience, religion preserved space for individual autonomy. By proclaiming universal moral standards, religion provided a basis for criticizing democratic excess. But what happens when religious faith weakens, as it has in much of the modern world? When people lose belief in transcendent moral truths, they become more susceptible to the claims of immanent authorities, scientific experts, administrative agencies, popular movements. When they abandon the idea of fixed moral standards, they become more willing to accept whatever the majority endorses as right. The result is what I call democratic atheism, not merely the absence of religious belief, but the transfer of religious sentiments to political objects. Citizens begin to expect from government what previous generations expected from God: perfect justice, complete security, ultimate meaning. They become willing to grant government unlimited authority in pursuit of these impossible goals. Chapter 6: The Fatal Attraction of Equality over Liberty. Of all the insights I gained during my American sojourn, none disturbs me more than this: democratic peoples love equality more than freedom, and they will sacrifice liberty to preserve equality when forced to choose between them. This preference, seemingly reasonable and even noble, leads inevitably toward the soft despotism I most fear because it makes citizens complicit in their own subjugation. The passion for equality that drives democratic revolution appears entirely justified. Why should some men enjoy privileges denied to others based merely on accidents of birth? Why should inherited status determine life opportunities? Why should legal distinctions create social castes? Democratic equality promises to eliminate these arbitrary advantages and give every person the chance to rise as far as talent and effort can carry them. But I discovered that democratic peoples do not merely want equality of opportunity, they increasingly demand equality of condition. They become frustrated when legal equality fails to produce actual equality. They resent seeing some citizens accumulate more wealth, achieve higher status, or exercise greater influence than others. They begin to view any form of superiority, even that earned through merit, as a violation of democratic principles. This evolution from equality of opportunity to equality of condition creates an opening for despotism. Citizens become willing to accept governmental power that limits individual freedom in order to reduce social inequality. They support policies that constrain the successful in order to help the unsuccessful. They endorse regulations that limit economic liberty in pursuit of economic equality. They approve of administrative control that reduces political freedom in the name of social justice. The process accelerates because equality is easier to measure than freedom. Citizens can see whether incomes are becoming more equal, whether educational opportunities are more widely distributed, whether social distinctions are diminishing. But they cannot easily measure whether their freedom is being reduced, especially when that reduction comes gradually through seemingly benevolent administrative expansion. Moreover, equality provides immediate gratification while freedom requires long-term responsibility. It feels good to see privileges eliminated, distinctions reduced, advantages shared. It requires effort to exercise freedom, wisdom to use it well, courage to defend it against encroachment. When citizens become comfortable and secure, they naturally prefer the satisfaction of equality to the burden of liberty. Governments understand this preference and exploit it skillfully. They promise greater equality while gradually expanding their authority. They present each new regulation as protection for the weak against the strong, each new program as assistance for the disadvantaged, each new agency as guardian of the public interest. Citizens welcome these innovations because they advance equality while appearing to respect freedom. The tragedy is that this trade-off ultimately fails to deliver even the equality it promises. Administrative despotism creates new forms of inequality between rulers and ruled, between those who administer and those who are administered, between those who understand the system and those who are dependent upon it. But these new inequalities are harder to see and therefore harder to resist than the old aristocratic distinctions. Citizens find themselves in a position I can only describe as democratic serfdom. They enjoy formal equality before the law but experience practical inequality in their relationship to governmental power. They possess theoretical liberty to criticize and resist but lack the practical capacity to govern themselves. They maintain the appearance of democratic participation while accepting the reality of administrative control. The most insidious aspect of this development is that citizens learn to love their chains. They prefer security to liberty, comfort to responsibility, equality to excellence. They mistake dependence for protection, uniformity for justice, submission for peace. Chapter 7: How Modern America Confirms Tocqueville's Predictions. As I reflect on America today through the lens of my 1830s observations, I find my predictions about democracy's vulnerabilities being fulfilled with disturbing precision. The soft despotism I warned against has not arrived through violent revolution or military coup, but through the gradual expansion of administrative power that citizens themselves have demanded and applauded. Modern America demonstrates how democracy can undermine itself while maintaining all the forms of free government. Consider the vast administrative apparatus that now governs American life. Federal agencies regulate everything from the food citizens eat to the cars they drive, from the education of their children to the care of their elderly, from the wages they earn to the health care they receive. State and local bureaucracies add additional layers of oversight and control. Citizens encounter governmental authority in countless daily interactions, most of which they accept as normal and necessary. This expansion has occurred with popular consent and often at popular demand. Americans have repeatedly asked their government to solve problems they feel incapable of addressing individually: economic instability, environmental degradation, social inequality, technological disruption, global competition. Each problem seems to require governmental solution, each solution requires expanded administrative authority, each expansion creates new dependencies that generate demands for further expansion. The result is precisely the condition I anticipated: a people who remain free in form but dependent in fact. Americans retain the right to vote, but their choices are increasingly constrained by administrative regulations they cannot understand or influence. They maintain freedom of speech, but their expression is shaped by public opinion that has been manufactured by media and marketing forces beyond their control. They preserve the right of association, but their associations are weakened by mobility, individualism, and governmental substitution for voluntary cooperation. Most significantly, I observe the erosion of those intermediate powers I considered essential to democratic liberty. Local government has lost authority to state and federal power. Civic associations have declined in membership and influence. Religious institutions have weakened in moral authority. Extended families have fragmented geographically and socially. Labor unions have diminished in size and scope. Even business associations increasingly depend on governmental favor rather than independent strength. Into this vacuum has stepped an expanded governmental apparatus that provides services once supplied by families, churches, communities, and voluntary associations. Government educates children, cares for the elderly, supports the unemployed, houses the homeless, feeds the hungry, treats the sick. These services address real needs and provide genuine benefits, but they also create dependencies that make self-governance more difficult. The technological revolution has accelerated these trends. Social media platforms shape public opinion through algorithms citizens do not understand. Surveillance technologies enable monitoring of behavior that would have amazed the most ambitious tyrants of previous ages. Digital platforms concentrate economic power in ways that dwarf the monopolies of earlier eras. Global economic forces subject local communities to decisions made in distant boardrooms and foreign capitals. Yet Americans largely embrace these developments because they enhance comfort, convenience, and equality. They appreciate having experts manage complex systems. They value the security that comprehensive administration provides. They enjoy the equality that comes from universal access to standardized services. They welcome the efficiency that technological coordination enables. What they fail to recognize is that they are becoming what I warned they might become, a flock of timid and industrious animals with the government as their shepherd. They work productively, consume enthusiastically, and vote regularly, but they have lost much of their capacity for self-governance. They depend on others to manage their healthcare, educate their children, plan their retirements, and even form their opinions on public questions. The COVID-19 pandemic revealed how complete this dependence has become. Americans accepted restrictions on movement, association, and economic activity that would have provoked armed resistance in earlier generations. They did so not because they were forced, but because they trusted experts to manage a crisis they felt incapable of handling themselves. This is the soft despotism I feared, comprehensive, benevolent, and widely desired by its subjects. Conclusion. The great democratic experiment I witnessed in America continues, but it faces the exact dangers I anticipated 2 centuries ago. The passion for equality that drives democratic progress contains within itself the seeds of democratic destruction. Citizens who demand that government secure their happiness and manage their affairs gradually lose the capacity to secure their own freedom and govern their own lives. Yet this outcome is not inevitable. Democracy retains the power to renew itself if citizens understand both its promises and its perils. Americans must rediscover the art of association, rebuild intermediate powers, and relearn the habits of self-governance. They must remember that freedom requires responsibility, that liberty demands vigilance, and that democracy needs citizens capable of thinking and acting independently. The choice before modern America remains the same choice that has faced every democratic people: accept the comfortable servitude of administrative dependence or embrace the demanding freedom of self-governance. The decision cannot be made by experts, leaders, or institutions. It must be made by each citizen in countless daily choices about how to live and how to participate in the common life of democracy.